Hey, welcome back to Developer Roadmaps. So, last time we got our hands dirty styling content, right? Now we're going to take that a huge step further. We're moving from just static design to creating dynamic, interactive experiences. It's all about arranging our elements into a solid structure and then bringing them to life with motion. All right, so you've got the hang of styling elements, changing colors, tweaking sizes. That's a fantastic start. But now we're going to build on that foundation. We're going to learn how to organize everything with some really powerful layout tools. And then, and this is the really fun part, we're going to make it all move with CSS animation. Okay, first things first, we got to talk about structure. You can't make things dance around the screen if they don't have a stage to dance on, right? So think of this as creating the blueprint for our page. Nailing this layout stuff is, well, it's an absolutely crucial checkpoint on your developer journey. So when it comes to modern CSS layouts, there are two heavy hitters you absolutely need to know: Flexbox and CSS Grid. The main difference? It's actually pretty simple, but it's a game changer. Flexbox is your go-to for one-dimensional layouts. Think a single row or a single column. But Grid? That's for the big stuff, two-dimensional layouts where you're managing both rows and columns at the same time. Let's break that down a bit more. All right, let's talk Flexbox. You just tell a container display flex and boom, all of its direct children become flexible items. From there, you can use properties like justify content to control how they're spaced out along the main axis, push them apart, bunch them in the center, and then align items handles the alignment on the cross axis. It is perfect for things like navigation links or a row of product cards. It just makes alignment, which used to be a total headache, incredibly easy. Now, for the big picture, we have CSS Grid. Seriously, when you need to wrangle an entire page layout, I'm talking header, sidebar, main content, footer, the whole shebang, Grid is your best friend. You just set display grid, and you can literally draw out a structure of columns and rows. You can even name different areas of your grid and tell your content, hey, you go here, and it just works. It's been a complete revolution for complex web design. Now, Flexbox and Grid are the stars of the show, for sure, but they're not the only players on the field. You've also got multi-column layout, which is awesome for what it sounds like, taking a huge chunk of text and making it flow into columns, kind of like a newspaper. You just use properties like column count. And we should probably give a nod to the old-timer, the float property. We definitely don't use it for building our main page structures anymore, but it's still pretty handy for its original job, making text wrap neatly around an image. Okay, so our content is all nicely structured. It knows where to sit on the page. Now what's next? Let's get into altering how an element looks without messing up the entire layout we just built. This is where we get to change its pose, if you will, using some cool CSS transforms. The CSS transform property basically gives us 4 main superpowers. First, we can translate an element, which is just a fancy way of saying we can move it around. Then we can rotate it, turn it. We can scale it to make it bigger or smaller, and we can even skew it to distort its shape. These functions are all about visually playing with an element to give it a totally new look. And here's the really important part, so listen up. Transform is a purely visual effect that gets applied after the browser has already figured out the layout. What does that mean for you? It means other elements on the page don't get pushed around or have to recalculate their position. This is a massive win for performance. The browser can hand off these changes to the graphics card, the GPU, which leads to super smooth animations. All right, we've got our blueprint, we've posed our elements, so now it's time for the final act, action. This is where we really bring our designs to life. We're talking about creating fluid motion that gives our users meaningful feedback and just makes the whole experience feel, well, more alive. So, when we want to create motion in CSS, there are basically 2 ways to go about it. First, you've got transitions. These are perfect for simple 2-state changes. Think about a button changing color when you hover over it. That's a classic transition. It's just going from state A to state B. But then you have keyframe animations. These are for telling a more complex story. They let you map out a whole sequence of steps, going from A to B to C and wherever else you want to take it. Transitions are pretty straightforward. You just pick a property you want to animate, say transform or background color, and then you give it a duration. But the secret sauce is the timing function. Something like ease in out makes the animation feel so much more natural. It starts off a bit slow, speeds up in the middle, and then eases to a stop. It's way better than just a clunky, robotic, linear movement. Keyframes, on the other hand, give you the ultimate control.
You use what's called an @keyframes rule to map out an entire animation sequence from start to finish. You define what the element should look like at different points in time, usually with percentages like 0%, 50%, and 100%. This is how you build those really complex multi-step animations that you just can't do with a simple transition.
So once you've defined your keyframes, you just apply them to an element using properties like animation name and animation duration. But, and this is maybe the single most important tip I can give you on animation, if you want buttery smooth, high-performance animations, you should really try to stick to animating just two properties, transform and opacity. Why? Because browsers are optimized to handle those two incredibly well. It makes all the difference for your user's experience. And always remember, animation isn't just decoration, it's a form of visual communication. Wow, okay, we have covered a ton of ground today. We can now build solid layouts with Flexbox and Grid, and we can bring them to life with transforms and animations. So, what's the next logical stop on our roadmap? Well, it's got to be making our designs work everywhere. I mean, it's great that we can build these awesome animated layouts, but we need to make sure they look fantastic on any device, not just a desktop, but on a tablet, on a phone, and every screen size you can imagine. So, in our next explainer, we're going to dive headfirst into responsive design. We'll look at things like media queries and fluid techniques to make everything we build truly universal. This is Developer Roadmaps. Map your path, build your career. I'll see you at the next stop.